The news broke like thunder over Buckingham Palace, sharp, sudden, and impossible to ignore. Zara Tindall, the Queen's eldest granddaughter, had been crowned the new Duchess of Sussex. Not by accident, not by marriage, but by royal decree, signed, sealed, and delivered by King Charles himself. And just like that, one of the most scandal-tainted titles in modern royal history was reborn in the hands of a woman who never wanted a crown in the first place. The question hit every news anchor, every royal watcher, every whispering household across Britain. Why Zara? Why now? And what does this mean for Meghan Markle, the woman who once made that same title synonymous with rebellion, glamour, and controversy? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The timing alone sent shockwaves. The decree wasn't some quiet footnote slipped into the Royal Gazette. It was an event, a televised signing, complete with the king's seal and solemn words that echoed across the marble halls of Windsor Castle. For the first time in modern memory, a royal title wasn't passed by marriage or inheritance. It was reclaimed, pulled out of scandal's shadow, and handed to someone who had spent her entire life staying away from royal drama. But why would King Charles make such a move now, at this particular moment when the monarchy was already under global scrutiny? Why give the Duchess of Sussex title to his niece, the daughter of princess, and a woman known for keeping her distance from royal theatrics? The answer, insiders whisper, might lie in a letter. A letter written years ago by Queen Elizabeth herself. A letter that was meant to remain sealed until the right moment. And now, that moment may have arrived. You see, the monarchy doesn't act on impulse. It never has. Every word, every ceremony, every decree has roots buried in decades of promises, politics, and family secrets. And this crowning of Zara Tindall, might just be the quiet culmination of one of the Queen's final wishes. Imagine this scene for a second. Buckingham Palace bathed in the orange glow of evening. The press corralled beyond the gates, cameras flashing, rumors flying. Inside, King Charles sits behind a heavy oak desk, the same desk his mother used for signing her Christmas broadcasts. In front of him lies a single parchment scroll. At the top, the embossed royal crest. At the bottom, a blank space waiting for the royal signature. Camilla sits across from him, silent, watching. A private secretary hovers by the doorway, nervous, eyes flickering between the king's pen and the press clock. Once the ink hits that parchment, the story cannot be untold. Once the decree is sealed, the world will know the Duchess of Sussex has been reborn. But the royal story begins long before that pen touched paper. It starts decades ago, with a young girl who preferred horses to headlines, competition to conversation, and freedom to fame. A girl who grew up in the shadow of Windsor's grandeur but lived outside its walls. A girl named Zara and Elizabeth Phillips, now Tindall, a name that once symbolized rebellion of a different kind. Not the fame-hungry rebellion of modern royals, but a quiet defiance. A choice to live as herself, not as her title. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the Queen loved her the most. But let's rewind, because this story isn't just about a new duchess. It's about what it means to reclaim something that was broken, to take back a symbol of royal dignity that had been dragged through scandal, exile, and televised confessionals. The title Duchess of Sussex had once been glittering, romantic, revolutionary. Now it was radioactive. So why would King Charles dare to resurrect it? Royal historians will tell you that no monarch in living memory has reassigned a title in such a way. It breaks unwritten rules, disturbs old hierarchies, and, let's be honest, reopens wounds the palace had tried for years to close. Meghan and Harry's departure had left scars, deep, public, and festering. Their interviews, documentaries, and tell-all projects tore through the fabric of royal secrecy like lightning through silk. For years, the royal family maintained its famous silence, its motto of never complain, never explain. But behind that silence, a strategy was brewing. And the strategist? King Charles himself. Those close to the king say he's a man driven by legacy, by the image of the crown his mother left him, and by the burden of restoring its balance. For all his modern touches and open emotions, Charles has always been a monarch who plays the long game. He knows the weight of symbols, and few symbols have been more tainted in recent memory than the Duchess of Sussex title. So, What better way to purify it than to give it to someone untouched by scandal? Someone with royal blood but no royal entitlement. Someone who embodies everything the monarchy wants to be seen as again: hardworking, humble, loyal, and, perhaps most importantly, uninterested in fame. Enter Zara. Zara, who never held a royal title by birth. Zara, who paid her own bills, built her own career, and earned Olympic medals not by privilege but by sweat. Zara, whose marriage to former rugby player Meghan Tindall has been called one of the healthiest, most grounded relationships in royal history. And now, Zara, the woman who has quietly become the monarchy's unexpected anchor, was suddenly stepping into the spotlight, wearing the title once worn by Meghan Markle. Can you feel the irony? The Duchess who fled royal duty in search of independence replaced by a woman who never wanted the crown, yet remained loyal to the family all along. It's poetic. It's strategic. It's symbolic revenge wrapped in royal velvet. But of course, not everyone is applauding. The news has reopened old wounds across both continents. In California, sources close to Meghan reportedly called the move a calculated humiliation. Some tabloids claim Meghan was in tears. Others say she laughed it off. The truth? No one knows for sure. But one thing is certain: the timing of King Charles's decision wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, and it sent a message that echoed far beyond the palace gates. The monarchy reclaims its own. The public, meanwhile, is divided. Some see this as an overdue act of restoration, a way of cleansing the Duchess title from the chaos of the past few years. Others view it as petty, vindictive, even cruel. Why not let the title rest? One royal watcher asked. Why reopen the wound? But then again, the crown has never been sentimental. It acts in preservation, not emotion. And in a monarchy where symbols speak louder than words, reviving the title of Duchess of Sussex under Zara Tindall's name was like reclaiming lost territory. And yet, there's something deeper brewing beneath the surface, something far more mysterious than royal politics. Because if you believe the whispers from Windsor's corridors, this wasn't Charles's idea alone. Some insiders suggest it was set in motion years ago, perhaps even before Meghan and Harry ever left the country. They talk about a hidden clause, a royal codicil, drafted during the Queen's reign, that quietly allowed the title to be reassigned under certain conditions of dignity and duty. And according to one retired court official, those conditions have now been met. Imagine that, a secret royal plan activated from beyond the grave. A letter sealed under Windsor Castle's highest security. A decree that only one person could sign, and that person was the new king. Some even claim that the Queen foresaw everything: the Sussex's departure, the fallout, the fractures, and ultimately, the need for restoration. And in that foresight, she may have left behind instructions. One palace source described it this way: the Queen always saw Zara as her mirror, strong, humble, and loyal. She trusted her. If she wanted anyone to carry the Sussex name into the next generation with dignity, it would be Zara. Of course, none of this is confirmed. The palace refuses to comment. The documents are sealed. But the story has taken on a life of its own, spreading like wildfire across social media, fueling debates about loyalty, legacy, and justice within the royal bloodline. Was this really a royal decision? Or was it destiny fulfilling the Queen's unspoken wish? Think about it. For years, the Sussex name was synonymous with controversy. Every headline about it screamed division, lawsuits, or accusations. Now, suddenly, it's attached to a woman whose biggest controversy is whether her horse came in first or second at the Grand Prix. That's not just rebranding. That's royal alchemy. Still, the question remains: how did we get here? What led King Charles, a monarch known for patience and diplomacy, to take such a bold and provocative step? Some say it was a moment of clarity after years of family tension. Others believe it was a final message to his son, an unspoken reminder that the monarchy can survive without him. Either way, it's a move that will define his reign. And there's one more twist. The decree, sources say, was not entirely new. Hidden within the royal archives was a draft bearing the Queen's signature, dated years before her death. A document that outlined her personal wish that the Duchess of Sussex title, should it fall into disrepute, be reendowed upon a member of sound character and service. The handwriting is unmistakably hers. The implications? Earth-shattering. If true, this wasn't just a father's retaliation, it was a queen's plan fulfilled. Now, imagine how Meghan must feel hearing that. To learn that the title she once made her own, through marriage, fame, and global activism, was quietly earmarked for someone else long before the storm even began. A woman who never asked for it, never sought it, yet somehow became its rightful heir. It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? The crown, the exile, the restoration. Betrayal and redemption playing out across generations. And yet, this isn't fiction, it's history being rewritten in real time. Or maybe, history finally correcting itself. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. The more one digs into this royal decree, the more questions emerge. There are reports of meetings between King Charles and Princess and weeks before the announcement. Quiet discussions about honor, service, and legacy. There are whispers of archival clerks being summoned to the palace, documents retrieved from Windsor's vault, legal advisors brought in under cover of darkness. And through it all, Zara remained silent. No interviews, no statements, no public appearances, just quiet composure, until the day of the signing. When she finally stepped forward, dressed not in royal finery, but in simple pale blue, she looked calm, almost reluctant. When reporters shouted questions, "How do you feel about becoming Duchess of Sussex?" she simply smiled and said, "It's not about titles. It's about doing what's right." That single sentence made headlines. Because whether she meant to or not, Zara had just defined the new chapter of the monarchy. Modesty over media, duty over drama, service over self. And yet, something about her tone, her expression, hinted that she knew more than she was letting on. That maybe this wasn't just an honor. It was a responsibility tied to something greater. Perhaps even a secret promise she was finally fulfilling. The British public felt it. The tension, the symbolism, the poetic justice of it all. But few realized that the story of Zara's unexpected ascension to Duchess of Sussex was only the beginning. Because behind the polished facade of royal ceremony, there lies an intricate web of letters, promises, and motives stretching back decades. One that involves not just the late queen, but a hidden chapter of royal history that could rewrite how we understand the Windsors entirely. And if those documents ever see the light of day, they could reveal something so shocking, so personal, that it might change the way we view both Meghan and Zara forever. They said the walls of Buckingham Palace hadn't heard a gasp like it since the death of Princess Diana. Inside the palace that morning, silence and shock reigned. King Charles III, calm, deliberate, and determined, had just signed what insiders are now calling the decree that shook the crown. The pen barely left the parchment before the announcement began to ripple through the royal network. Senior aides received encrypted emails, couriers were dispatched to Windsor and Sandringham, and within minutes, every royal correspondent in London had the same cryptic message. His Majesty has issued a decree concerning the title of Duchess of Sussex. The phrase alone was enough to send phones buzzing and speculation soaring. Because everyone knew that title had been off limits, almost radioactive. It had been associated with so much tension, so much public fallout, that even mentioning it in palace corridors used to draw warning looks. Yet here was the king, boldly reclaiming it, and placing it in the hands of someone entirely unexpected. Zara Tindall, his niece, the daughter of the famously no-nonsense Princess Anne. At exactly 10:42 a.m., the Royal Communications Office released the official statement. It was brief, formal, and flawless in tone, by the authority vested in His Majesty the King, and in recognition of service, dignity, and loyalty to the crown, Zara and Elizabeth Tindall is hereby granted the title of Duchess of Sussex, effective immediately. No explanation, no preamble, no mention of Meghan Markle or Prince Harry. Just a crisp declaration that rewrote royal history with a single sentence. The public reaction was instantaneous and chaotic. News outlets scrambled to verify the announcement. Social media went into meltdown. Within an hour, hashtags like hashtag Zara Duchess of Sussex and hashtag Royal Reversal trended globally. Some hailed the king's move as a masterstroke of restoration. Others called it the ultimate royal snub. And perhaps it was both. You have to picture the scene outside the palace gates. Reporters shouting questions, tourists pressing their phones against the railings, a sense of disbelief hanging in the cold London air. The monarchy, often accused of moving too slowly, had just made its boldest move in decades. It wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a statement of control. The message was clear. The Sussex legacy now belonged to the monarchy again, not to Montecito. But here's where it gets fascinating. That decree didn't appear out of thin air. According to palace insiders, it had been sitting, quietly, deliberately, in a red leather folder in the king's private study for months. Some even say it was drafted before Queen Elizabeth's death, but never acted upon. Others claim it was a last-minute decision, influenced by a conversation between Charles and Princess, and just days before the public announcement. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. King Charles knew exactly what he was doing. Because make no mistake, this was not just about Zara. It was about reclaiming a narrative that had spun wildly out of the royal family's control. For years, the Sussex name had been a lightning rod for controversy, a symbol of division between the monarchy and modern celebrity culture. Harry and Meghan had turned it into a global brand. Netflix deals, podcast contracts, interviews, memoirs. The crown had lost ownership of its own title. And now, with one stroke of a pen, Charles took it back. But not in anger, not in fury, in strategy. A royal aide, speaking under anonymity, put it this way: His Majesty believes the monarchy must evolve, but not by surrendering tradition. The decision to appoint Zara was about balance, modern grace with ancient roots. The Duchess of Sussex title deserved dignity again. Let's pause on that for a moment. Dignity again. That phrase keeps coming up among palace insiders, almost like a quiet mantra. Dignity, because the monarchy had been humiliated, dragged into Hollywood's echo chamber. Again, because the crown has a long memory. It doesn't forget slights. It simply waits for the right moment to restore order. And that moment, evidently, had come. Across Britain, reactions split down familiar lines. Royal loyalists celebrated Zara's appointment as poetic justice. Commentators praised her unpretentious lifestyle, her marriage to Mike Tindall, her work ethic, her independence. If anyone embodies the spirit of duty without drama, one biographer said, it's Zara. On the other side, Meghan's supporters saw it differently. This is cruel, one American commentator declared live on air. It's a symbolic erasure of Meghan Markle's contributions. You can't just reassign a title as if it's a trophy. The debate grew heated, emotional, and deeply personal, exactly as the palace expected. Because if the royal family has learned anything from centuries of crisis, it's this: public attention can destroy you or distract your enemies. And this decree did both. As the world argued over Zara, Meghan's ongoing disputes with Netflix and production setbacks faded from headlines. Prince Harry's rumored memoir sequel overshadowed. The focus was back on the crown, where King Charles wanted it all along. Now let's rewind to that moment inside the signing room. The moment history pivoted. According to multiple sources, the king's private secretary laid out the parchment on a velvet-lined tray. The decree had already been reviewed by royal council and sealed with the crest of St. Edward's crown. As the king prepared to sign, he reportedly paused, glancing at a small framed photograph on his desk, a picture of his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II. Observers noticed a flicker of emotion cross his face, something between pride and melancholy. One insider later said, it wasn't just a signature. It was a continuation of her will. He was fulfilling something she started. A poetic notion, perhaps, but one rooted in whispers that the Queen had personally discussed the Sussex title's legacy years earlier, after the royal wedding in 2018. She had, it said, expressed hope that the title would honor service to the crown, not conflict with it. And that, in many ways, is exactly what Charles did by granting it to Zara. But not everyone inside the palace approved. Some senior courtiers reportedly argued that the move would reignite old wounds with Prince Harry. Others worried it would appear vengeful or political. Yet Charles overruled them, reportedly saying, the monarchy cannot be afraid to act with clarity. That phrase, act with clarity, was later quoted in nearly every newspaper editorial covering the event. Clarity, in royal language, means reclaiming authority. And with this single decree, King Charles made it abundantly clear who controlled the royal narrative. Still, something about Zara's reaction was different, almost reluctant. When the cameras finally caught her exiting the palace later that day, She wasn't smiling broadly or basking in glory. She looked thoughtful, almost burdened. Standing beside her husband, she said little, offering only a polite wave to the crowd. A few journalists shouted questions. "How do you feel about being Duchess of Sussex?" But Zara merely replied, "I'm honored to continue my grandmother's values." It was a diplomatic answer, yes, but something in her tone suggested a deeper awareness, like she knew this title came with more than just prestige. It came with expectation, history, responsibility, and perhaps a secret none of us yet understood. Meanwhile, inside Clarence's house, Camilla reportedly kept her distance from the unfolding media frenzy. Sources close to her said she supported the decision but preferred to let the king lead. Others suggest she wasn't entirely comfortable, aware that any mention of the Sussex title carried emotional baggage the family hadn't fully processed. Behind closed doors, though, it's said that the king and princess shared a private moment of quiet satisfaction. For Anne, this was personal. Her daughter's recognition wasn't just a royal reshuffle. It was vindication for decades of loyal service that often went unnoticed. She, more than anyone, knew how hard Zara had worked to maintain her independence while still honoring the family legacy. The queen had admired that too, and that admiration, many believe, planted the seed for this very decree. Let's step back for a second. The last time a title of such magnitude was reassigned under extraordinary circumstances dates back to the early 20th century, when titles were stripped from German relatives during wartime for dishonor to the crown. Never since has a monarch dared to so boldly reclaim a title associated with controversy. This wasn't just modern history, it was precedent-breaking. So what does it mean for Zara going forward? In public, the new Duchess of Sussex will likely continue her existing work: equestrian competitions, charity engagements, and family commitments. But symbolically, she now stands as the bridge between two worlds, the royal family's traditional core and its modern reinvention. She represents what the monarchy wants the Sussex title to mean again: loyalty without limelight, duty without drama. Still, whispers persist that Zara initially refused the title. Multiple palace insiders claim she hesitated, citing her desire for a private life. Some say she only agreed after learning about a personal letter written by Queen Elizabeth II years earlier, one that directly mentioned her name. That letter, allegedly sealed within the royal archives, may have been the Queen's private endorsement of Zara as the rightful future holder of the Sussex title should circumstances ever demand restoration. If true, it would mean this decree wasn't simply Charles's idea. It was destiny guided by the late Queen's foresight. The world may never see that letter. The palace won't confirm its existence. But as one senior source put it, Zara's acceptance wasn't just out of respect for her uncle. It was out of respect for her grandmother's memory. And perhaps that's the most powerful image of all. Not revenge, not rivalry, restoration. Still, one question lingers. What happens to Meghan Markle now? Officially, the Duchess retains her style as the wife of Prince Harry. But with Zara's investiture, the symbolic claim to the title has shifted. It's a constitutional gray zone, one that royal lawyers have been quietly navigating for months. Some argue that Meghan's use of Duchess of Sussex will now be informal, while others believe her name will eventually be removed from official royal records altogether. The ambiguity, as ever, keeps the press fed and the palace comfortably silent. But inside those marble halls, this decree marked more than a title change. It was a message to the world, to the family, and perhaps most pointedly, to Harry and Meghan themselves. A reminder that the crown never forgets, never relinquishes, and never truly loses control. And yet, as history has shown, every royal decree comes with consequences. The ink may have dried, but the ripples have only begun to spread. Political analysts warn this move could stir tension within the Commonwealth, where Meghan and Harry still have vocal supporters. Legal experts question whether reassigning a peerage title sets a dangerous precedent for future monarchs. Even within the family, whispers of discomfort remain. William reportedly stayed silent during the announcement. Princess Beatrice and Eugenie, both close to Meghan once, have avoided public comment entirely. It's the calm before another storm, perhaps. Because beneath the surface of royal ceremony, one undeniable truth remains. This decision didn't just reshape the monarchy, it reopened a family wound. They say the walls of Balmoral Castle keep more secrets than Buckingham Palace ever will. Stories whispered by the fire, promises sealed with nods instead of signatures. One of those secrets, buried for decades, may explain everything about Zara Tindall's new title. And it begins not with a decree, but with a promise made by a grandmother to her granddaughter. It was late summer, 2003. The Scottish air was thick with mist and the faint smell of pine. The Queen was sitting by the Balmoral fireplace, wrapped in her familiar tartan blanket, when a young Zara Phillips entered the room. She wasn't there as a princess, because she wasn't one. She wasn't even a duchess. She was simply Zara, a spirited young woman who'd spent her life riding horses instead of headlines. She came to see her grandmother not for ceremony, but for comfort. The Queen had always had a special fondness for Zara. Unlike many royals, Zara carried no titles. She didn't live under the weight of Her Royal Highness. And the Queen liked that. It reminded her of something she'd once said privately to her aides. Titles don't make you royal. Your conduct does. That day, Zara had just won another equestrian competition, but she didn't come to boast. She came to talk about freedom, about living life her own way. I don't need all that, she reportedly told the Queen, referring to royal life. I just want to do my job and ride. The Queen smiled, that knowing smile she'd mastered over 70 years of reign. And that, she said softly, is exactly why you deserve more than you know. It was one of those cryptic royal lines that linger in your mind years later. What did she mean by deserve more? What could the Queen possibly have had in mind for her granddaughter who wanted nothing to do with titles or crowns? It turns out, that simple fireside conversation may have planted the seed for the most surprising royal twist of the century, the day Zara Tindall became Duchess of Sussex. Now, let's rewind to what we know. Throughout her life, Queen Elizabeth had an almost prophetic sense of timing. She planned everything, anniversaries, speeches, even the color of her dresses, years ahead. And family matters were no different. She had contingency plans for everything from abdication to scandal. But her greatest focus, especially in her final decade, was legacy. How to secure the stability of the monarchy for generations to come. That's where Zara came in. By the early 2000s, the Queen had seen the royal family evolve, some would say unravel, under the glare of media scrutiny. Divorces, controversies, public feuds. She saw how titles that once symbolized service had become tools of vanity. She worried about how history would remember her bloodline. She wanted, as one insider later put it, a figure who embodied the monarchy's best values: duty without entitlement, work without spectacle. Zara fit that mold perfectly. She was independent, grounded, and quietly proud. She didn't use her royal connections to climb. She earned her way to Olympic silver. She respected the institution without needing it. And for a queen obsessed with continuity, Zara represented hope. A modern royal spirit that didn't need constant attention. Around that time, there were private discussions between the Queen, her daughter Princess Anne, and her then private secretary, Sir Edward Young. According to palace staffers, the Queen expressed a clear wish. If ever a title falls into question, it should be reclaimed by one who honors it in silence, not one who tarnishes it in speech. No one knew then what she meant. But those words became chillingly prophetic years later, after Meghan Markle's whirlwind entrance and stormy exit from the royal fold. In 2018, the world watched as Prince Harry and Meghan Markle became the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, a title revived from centuries of quiet dormancy. The Queen herself had chosen it, reportedly believing the young couple would carry the Sussex name with grace. She even referenced it privately, saying, "The Sussexes will bring a touch of modernity the crown can use." But as we know, what followed was chaos. Interviews, accusations, departures. And as the palace weathered that storm, the Queen was said to be quietly heartbroken. Not just over the family rift, but over the damage done to something she valued deeply, the honor of royal titles. That's when, insiders say, she revisited an old idea, the one she'd once hinted at to Zara. A restoration plan, as it was described in internal notes. A confidential document outlining how certain titles could be reassigned under special conditions. If they were abandoned, brought into disrepute, or vacated by conduct unbecoming. The Queen didn't act on it right away. She never wanted to embarrass her grandson. But she did something quintessentially Elizabethan. She prepared. She wrote letters. She signed documents quietly. She made sure that, if the monarchy ever needed to reclaim its honor, it could do so without hesitation. And in one of those letters, still locked in the royal archives, she named a person she trusted most to carry out that restoration. That person was Princess Anne. Sources say the Queen's letter to and contained a single line that now seems prophetic. Should the title of Sussex require renewal, let it pass to a true servant of the crown. You will know who that is. And, ever the dutiful daughter, kept that letter hidden. She told no one, not even Zara. She saw it as a promise, not a prophecy. A secret between mother and daughter. Years later, when Queen Elizabeth passed, and found herself reflecting on that cryptic instruction. For months, she said nothing. But after Meghan and Harry's relationship with the royal family continued to fracture, and the monarchy's public image wavered, she reportedly approached King Charles privately. According to one palace insider, the conversation took place at Windsor shortly before Christmas, and presented the sealed letter to her brother. Charles read it in silence. When he finished, he looked up and said 5 words. Then we must honor her. Those words set in motion the chain of events that led to Zara's appointment as Duchess of Sussex. But let's pause for a moment. Can you imagine the weight of that realization? The Queen's eldest son and daughter, now fulfilling her hidden wish years after her death. A wish that, by design or destiny, seemed to predict the exact collapse of the Sussex legacy. It's almost as if the Queen had foreseen the turmoil and had already chosen her solution. Even some royal historians have been stunned by the parallels. Dr. Margaret Lennox, a longtime Windsor scholar, said in a BBC interview, the Queen had an extraordinary ability to anticipate outcomes without forcing them. Her letter to Princess Anne, if genuine, is a masterclass in foresight. She didn't interfere, she prepared. And what's more intriguing is that this wasn't the first time the Queen made private promises that outlived her. In her diaries, she once wrote that her greatest fear was watching honor replaced by ambition. That sentiment, when applied to the Sussex saga, feels eerily relevant. So how did Zara finally learn the truth? That's where the story takes a deeply emotional turn. According to a source close to the Tindalls, Zara initially resisted King Charles's offer. She felt uncomfortable holding a title that once belonged to her cousin's wife. She didn't want to appear to be taking sides or fueling media speculation. But that changed when Princess Anne finally revealed the Queen's letter. The one that mentioned the Sussex title's future renewal, and showed Zara the letter one afternoon at Gackham Park, the family estate. No cameras, no ceremony. Just mother and daughter sitting at the kitchen table with tea, reading the Queen's handwriting one last time. Zara reportedly cried. She had never known her grandmother had written those words. I never wanted a title, she told him quietly. I still don't. But if she wanted this, I'll do it properly. Those words reached Charles within the hour. And 2 weeks later, he signed the decree. That's how royal history often unfolds. Not through grand gestures, but through quiet promises honored decades later. The Queen had once told her private secretary, the real strength of a crown is not in its jewels, but in the memories that uphold it. And now, Zara Tindall's new role wasn't just a title. It was a living memory of the Queen's promise. But let's not forget the irony. Meghan Markle had once been hailed as the Queen's modernizing force. She brought Hollywood charm, global attention, and youthful energy to a centuries-old institution. Yet, in the end, it wasn't glamour that restored the Sussex name. It was humility. It wasn't rebellion that impressed the monarchy. It was restraint. That quiet contrast between Meghan and Zara, between ambition and steadiness, now defines how the royal family tells its own story. Zara's Duchess title isn't just a crown, it's a correction. And if you think this was merely symbolic, think again. Because according to multiple reports, the Queen's promise to Princess Anne didn't stop at a single letter. There was another document, one stored deep within Windsor's private vault, detailing the Queen's vision for a legacy of service, a system by which titles could be repurposed to reflect modern acts of loyalty. Some insiders even refer to it as the Restoration Plan. Its existence remains unverified, but whispers about it have surfaced for years among staff at Windsor and Balmoral. One retired chamberlain, speaking under condition of anonymity, said, "The Queen always planned for repair, not revenge." She knew some titles would fall out of grace, and she believed they could rise again if given to the right people. That's what makes Zara's new title so significant. It's not just about her. It's about the future of the monarchy itself, a blueprint of how the crown survives scandal without losing dignity. And yet, for all the elegance of the Queen's foresight, there's still one haunting mystery. How did she know? How could she possibly have anticipated the Sussex fallout so precisely? Some royal watchers believe she sensed it from the start. From the very moment Meghan joined the family, the Queen reportedly observed the tension between tradition and individuality. She respected Meghan's passion but worried about her impatience with royal protocol. "She wants too much too soon," she once told a confidant. But the Queen never judged. Instead, she prepared. And that preparation culminated in one extraordinary moment, the signing of that decree decades later. A moment that wasn't just Charles's decision, but Elizabeth's final echo. The Queen's secret promise, made by firelight in Balmoral, had finally been fulfilled. Still, one detail remains tantalizingly unclear. What exactly did the Queen mean by renewal of the Sussex title? Was it simply symbolic? Or did she foresee something even larger? A restructuring of the royal lineage itself? Because hidden within her private papers, there's rumored to be one more document. One that not only references Zara but also hints at a mysterious condition tied to the title's inheritance. A condition so specific that even senior aides hesitate to discuss it. And that document, sources say, might hold the key to the next shocking chapter in this royal drama. Because when it was discovered, Princess and realized something astonishing. The Queen hadn't just named Zara as a potential duchess. She had named someone else too. And what found in those papers could upend everything we thought we knew about how the monarchy truly works. The news of Zara's rise had barely settled before the world's attention swung back to the very name that had made the title infamous in the first place, Sussex. For years, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex was not a royal designation. It was a global brand. A logo. A movement. A headline machine. But behind the shimmering veneer of Netflix deals, polished interviews, and California sunshine, something far darker had been unraveling. The Sussex downfall didn't happen overnight. It wasn't one scandal, one quote, or one documentary. It was a slow, grinding erosion of trust, of respect, of purpose. Like a palace wall left unguarded, it didn't collapse in an explosion. It crumbled piece by piece, until only a hollow echo remained where royal duty once lived. Let's rewind to where the cracks began. The wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in 2018 was supposed to be the dawn of a new era, the first true merging of old-world monarchy and modern celebrity. The Queen had granted them the historic title of Duke and Duchess of Sussex, resurrecting it after more than a century of dormancy. The symbolism was powerful, a young, mixed-race American actress marrying into the oldest royal house in the world. For a brief moment, it felt like history itself was healing. But that feeling didn't last long. From the start, Meghan and Harry faced impossible expectations. The public wanted a fairy tale. The press wanted controversy. The crown wanted obedience. And Meghan, ambitious, outspoken, and unwilling to play by centuries-old rules, wanted freedom. She spoke her mind, challenged traditions, and quickly became a lightning rod for both adoration and outrage. It was a volatile mix. Then came the friction. Rumors of tension with palace aides. Reports of arguments with Kate Middleton. Headlines about staff departures, unrealistic demands, and royal rudeness. The palace tried to contain it, but the tabloids smelled blood. Behind closed doors, the Queen urged calm. "They're young," she reportedly told advisors. "They'll find their way." But others weren't so patient. Charles was frustrated. William was distant. And the machinery of the royal household, that invisible network of courtiers, press officers, and private secretaries, began to close ranks. By late 2019, the Sussexes' relationship with the press had completely deteriorated. They felt trapped, surveilled, and misrepresented. "We just want to live," Meghan said during that now famous ITV interview. Her voice trembled as she told the reporter, "Not many people have asked if I'm okay." That single sentence reverberated across the world. It was vulnerable, honest, and yet, for the palace, it was catastrophic. Because royals aren't supposed to speak like that. They're not supposed to show the cracks. In January 2020, the bombshell dropped. Harry and Meghan announced, via Instagram, that they were stepping back from royal duties, a move that blindsided the family and shattered centuries of precedent. For the first time in modern history, a senior royal couple had effectively quit. The headlines called it Megxit. The Queen was hurt. Charles was furious. And the institution, which thrived on control and protocol, suddenly looked powerless. In the months that followed, the Sussexes moved to Canada, then to California. They signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify. They launched Archewell. They started a new life built on independence, philanthropy, and storytelling. But as the cameras followed them, so did the controversies. Every interview seemed to peel back another layer of palace secrecy. Every documentary revealed more grievances, more pain, more accusation. What began as a royal love story became a public therapy session, one that exposed the monarchy's darkest corners and, in doing so, dimmed the couple's own light. The Oprah interview was the breaking point. Millions watched as Meghan accused the royal household of racism, neglect, and emotional cruelty. Harry spoke of feeling trapped within his own family. "My father stopped taking my calls," he confessed. The world gasped. The monarchy was shaken to its core. But while the interview earned the couple's sympathy from many, it also burned bridges that could never be rebuilt. For the first time, the monarchy, that ancient institution known for its silence, began to quietly push back. Senior courtiers called it a betrayal. Palace insiders described it as an earthquake. And the Queen, in her signature composure, issued just 9 words that said it all. Recollections may vary, but they are taken very seriously. It was the softest dagger ever thrown. From that point forward, the Sussexes were outsiders. Their titles remained, but their access was gone. They were stripped of royal patronages, military honors, and most importantly, the trust of the family. And yet, in the US, they thrived for a while. Their image became their empire. Until it didn't. Netflix wanted content. Spotify wanted ratings. The public wanted authenticity. And gradually, cracks began to show in the Sussex brand. Projects stalled. Deals quietly evaporated. The Spotify podcast partnership ended abruptly, with executives reportedly calling the couple difficult and directionless. Then came the Netflix backlash. Their documentary series, once billed as groundbreaking, was criticized for being self-indulgent, repetitive, even contradictory. What was meant to redefine their legacy instead reminded the world how much of it revolved around grievance. Meanwhile, inside the palace, King Charles and Queen Camilla watched it all unfold from a distance. To them, the Sussex saga had become an open wound, one that refused to heal. Each new revelation, each headline, each soundbite reminded Britain of division. And to a monarchy that depends on unity, division is deadly. So when Charles became king after the Queen's passing, his mission was clear: restore stability, reclaim control, and rebuild dignity. That's why the Sussex downfall wasn't just a family tragedy. It was a turning point in the monarchy's survival. And here's the irony. While Harry and Meghan's star was fading, Zara's quiet life was shining brighter than ever. No scandals, no interviews, no drama, just hard work, family, and consistency. The public began to notice. Why can't more royals be like Zara? Headlines began to ask. Her popularity soared, the same way the Sussexes once had. It was almost poetic. The louder Meghan and Harry became, the more powerful Zara's silence seemed. But perhaps the most dramatic twist came in the months before King Charles's decree. Because just when it seemed the Sussex brand had stabilized, something unexpected emerged, a legal complication involving the Duchess title itself. According to reports quietly circulating among royal legal circles, the original charter granting the Sussex title contained a conditional clause, one Meghan herself had signed as part of the formal documentation after her marriage. The clause, largely ceremonial, stated that the title was granted in perpetuity under the principles of service, residence, and representation. In plain English, a duchess must reside within the United Kingdom, uphold its image, and represent the crown in conduct. Failure to do so could trigger revocation by sovereign discretion. At the time, no one imagined that clause would ever matter. But in 2023, with Meghan living in California, launching commercial ventures, and publicly criticizing the monarchy, that line became a legal lifeline for King Charles. Palace lawyers reportedly began reviewing the clause quietly, testing its strength under current peerage laws. The conclusion, according to one insider, was astonishing. It's valid. The king has the authority. That discovery became the foundation for the decree that would later crown Zara Tindall as Duchess of Sussex. It wasn't vengeance. It was legality. It was reclaiming what had been relinquished. But it's worth remembering, for all the contracts and legalities, this story isn't about paperwork. It's about people. About how two lives, Meghan's and Zara's, became opposite mirrors of the same crown. Meghan once symbolized the monarchy's future. Zara now represents its restoration. One reached for freedom and lost the title's sanctity. The other avoided fame and inherited its legacy. Still, the emotional undercurrent can't be ignored. Harry, by all accounts, was blindsided by his father's decision. Sources close to him say he first learned about the decree not from a phone call, but from a news alert on his phone while in Los Angeles. He was stunned, one friend revealed. He didn't believe it at first. He thought it had to be fake. When he confirmed it, he reportedly called Charles. The call went unanswered. For Harry, this was more than a political move. It was personal. The title of Sussex was the last link he had to his royal identity. Losing control of it, seeing it handed to his cousin, felt like watching the final thread of his birthright unravel. As for Meghan, her reaction remains a subject of speculation. Some reports claim she was furious, seeing it as a deliberate humiliation. Others say she was defiant, allegedly telling friends, "They can keep their title. We've already built our own." But even she must have realized the symbolic sting. The very name that once launched her into global royalty was now being used to erase her from royal history. And yet, perhaps the most haunting irony of all is this: the Queen saw it coming. That's right. Remember the Balmoral letter Princess and revealed to King Charles? It didn't just mention Zara. It included a line referring to the safeguarding of the Sussex name. Those words weren't random. They were deliberate. The Queen had foreseen that the title might one day need reclaiming, and she left behind the means to do it. It's as if she knew that someday, the Sussex name would lose its meaning, and that someone, someday, would have to give it back its dignity. That someone turned out to be Zara. And so, the Sussex downfall wasn't just about the collapse of a royal couple's image. It was the necessary prelude to the monarchy's rebirth. The Queen's promise, the King's decree, and Zara's acceptance all converged in one historic act of restoration. But there's still one unanswered question, one that no decree can explain. Why did Princess Anne wait so long to reveal that letter? Why did she keep her mother's secret until after the Sussex brand had completely crumbled? Some palace staff whisper that she was waiting for the perfect alignment, when the family's dignity could be restored without appearing vindictive. Others say she hesitated because she knew what the revelation would mean for Harry and for her daughter. Whatever the reason, that delay created the perfect storm. Because when Anne finally stepped forward, she didn't just deliver a letter. She uncovered something else buried deep in the Queen's private collection. A document that proves the Queen herself had once planned to reassign the Sussex title under extraordinary circumstances. And that document wasn't just theoretical. It contained a name. A name no one outside the royal family was supposed to see. The same name King Charles read before signing the decree. The same name that made him pause, look up, and whisper. So that's what she meant. And once that name surfaced, the fate of the Sussex legacy and Meghan Markle's royal story was sealed forever. Because what Princess Anne found next didn't just explain the decree. It revealed that the Queen had predicted the Sussex downfall long before it began, and she'd written down exactly how to fix it. It started with a whisper in a locked room. A single folder, crimson and worn, carried by a trembling archivist into King Charles's private study at Clarence House. Inside that folder lay a document that had been sealed for years, untouched, unspoken, and unseen by anyone outside the Queen's most trusted circle. When the King opened it, he reportedly paused for a long time, his hand resting on the paper as though he recognized the weight of what it contained. And then, with a deep breath, he read it, line by line, clause by clause, until his expression turned from curiosity to shock. It was the document that undid Meghan Markle. The contents of that royal file have never been released publicly, but palace insiders who've seen it describe it as a formal codicil, a contingency order prepared during the Queen's reign to protect the integrity of certain peerage titles. In other words, it was a legal safety switch, a royal failsafe. And buried deep within it was a clause so obscure, so specific, that it would come to haunt one of the most famous women on earth. The clause, according to those who've read it, outlined a scenario under which the Duchess of Sussex title could be revoked, not through scandal or disgrace, but through voluntary abandonment of representation. In plain English, it meant that if the Duchess chose to stop representing the United Kingdom, if she deliberately withdrew from royal service and sought to act in a private or commercial capacity contrary to the interests of the crown, her right to the title could be suspended by royal prerogative. That clause, at the time of the wedding, had seemed irrelevant, even ceremonial. But after Megxit, after California, after Oprah, Netflix, and Spotify, that clause wasn't ceremonial anymore. It was actionable. The Queen had drafted it years before. Some say at the urging of her legal team after observing how modern life blurred the lines between royalty and celebrity. She'd seen how Diana's global fame complicated her title even after her divorce. She'd seen how the Duke and Duchess of Windsor's exile left a stain that lingered for decades. The Queen had always been pragmatic, not vindictive. Protect the crown from itself, she once told an advisor, even from those who wear it. So when Meghan and Harry stepped away in 2020, they didn't just leave behind royal duties. They triggered a clause they never knew existed. Or maybe Meghan did know. That's the question now. Because sources close to the palace allege that Meghan was informed of the clause before signing her premarital documentation, a ceremonial but binding set of acknowledgments reviewed by the Privy Council. It was all there, in the fine print. Her agreement to uphold the responsibilities that came with the title, her understanding of the potential for revocation, and her acknowledgement that peerage titles were in service to the realm, not in possession of the holder. A formality, she'd been told. Nothing more. But it wasn't. It was the trapdoor that would later open beneath her. For years, the document sat unnoticed, collecting dust. But after the Sussexes began building their media empire in America, questions began to surface. Legal scholars debated whether their continued use of royal titles for commercial ventures violated the spirit, or even the letter, of royal law. The palace remained silent. Officially, the matter was private. But behind closed doors, discussions were heating up. Then, in early 2024, Princess and reportedly requested access to the Queen's personal correspondence for an unrelated archival project. That's when she discovered the Crimson folder, the one labeled Peerage Contingencies, Sussex. She didn't open it at first, but something about the title caught her eye. When she finally did, she found not just the Queen's handwriting, but her signature, and the signatures of two witnesses, Sir Edward Young and the Lord Chamberlain. It wasn't a casual note. It was an official royal instrument, and it contained one crucial line. The Duchy of Sussex may, in cases of abandonment or conduct unbecoming, be reassigned to another bearer of Her Majesty's choosing, at the discretion of the reigning sovereign. That line changed everything, and brought the file to King Charles personally. He read it twice. Then he reportedly leaned back and said, almost to himself, "So that's what she meant." What did the Queen mean? Insiders say she was referring to a conversation she had with Charles shortly after Harry's wedding. A private discussion about the fragility of modern marriage and the need to safeguard the monarchy's image in a rapidly changing world. She had been particularly concerned about titles falling into misinterpretation, her polite way of saying she didn't want royal designations turned into celebrity trademarks. Now, years later, that fear had become reality, and the clause she'd written to prevent it had become Charles's most powerful weapon. Here's where it gets even more astonishing. According to a retired member of the Royal Legal Office, Meghan herself had unknowingly acknowledged the clause, in writing, as part of her official induction into the royal peerage. The signature, still preserved in the archive, was hers. That single line, that single signature, gave Charles the legal foundation to act. He didn't need Parliament. He didn't need a vote. He just needed his mother's clause, and her foresight. It's ironic, isn't it? The woman who once symbolized the monarchy's modernization was undone by the monarchy's oldest weapon, its own paperwork. But what makes this story truly fascinating isn't just the legal maneuver, it's the moral dimension behind it. Charles didn't act immediately. In fact, for nearly 2 years after the Queen's passing, he avoided touching the issue. He hoped, according to several palace sources, that reconciliation was still possible, that perhaps Harry and Meghan would find their way back, even partially. But when reports surfaced of Meghan pitching her own television projects, independent, commercial, and notably branded under her royal title, that was the breaking point. That's when the crimson folder came off the shelf. Now, imagine that moment. The king sitting at his desk, the weight of monarchy pressing on his shoulders. Before him, the Queen's handwriting, crisp, deliberate, protective. The same penmanship that had once signed his birth certificate now authorized him to correct a historic imbalance. To many, it looked like revenge. To Charles, it was responsibility. He once told a confidant, "If the crown loses its meaning, it loses everything." That sentiment became the unspoken justification for what came next. Within days of reviewing the Queen's document, Charles convened a private legal council. They discussed the risks, the optics, the potential backlash. The meeting lasted nearly 6 hours. When it ended, the king stood, looked out the window toward Buckingham Palace, and said, "Then let the Sussex title return home." The next morning, palace staff began drafting the decree, the one that would formally transfer the Duchess of Sussex title to Zara Tindall. And while the world reacted with shock and awe, few realized how long this had been coming. The crown had waited years to reclaim what it believed was rightfully its own, and it had the Queen's blessing all along. Still, there's another layer to this story, one that few have dared to touch. Because alongside that legal clause was something else in the Queen's handwriting, a personal note, written in her characteristic blue ink. A message not for lawyers, but for family. It read, "The Duchess of Sussex is more than a title. It is a measure of grace under service. Should its meaning be lost, it must be renewed through one whose heart reflects its origin." Those words, when read by Princess Anne, reportedly moved her to tears, because she knew exactly who her mother was referring to. Grace under service. That was Zara. It's hard not to see the symmetry. Meghan's tenure as Duchess of Sussex had begun with global glamour, royal ceremonies, and millions of flashing cameras. Zara's began with silence. No fanfare, no television coverage, no public coronation. Just a simple signing and a bowed head. Two duchesses, same title, opposite spirits. And yet, even as Charles's decision brought closure to one chapter, it ignited a new storm in another. Legal experts began debating the ramifications. Could a monarch reassign a living title holder's peerage to another without formal renunciation? Technically, yes. The royal prerogative allows it. But symbolically, it was unprecedented. Supporters of Meghan cried foul. "It's cruel. It's archaic." One commentator fumed on morning television. But defenders of the king countered, "It's justice. It's restoration." And perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Because when you strip away the politics, the symbolism, and the outrage, you're left with something hauntingly simple, a monarch fulfilling his mother's foresight. Still, one question refuses to go away. How did Meghan, intelligent, media-savvy, legally cautious, miss this clause? How did she not see the trapdoor beneath the fine print? Some speculate that she did see it, but underestimated it. She may have assumed it was symbolic, or that her global influence would protect her from enforcement. Others whisper that the document Meghan signed was only partially disclosed to her, that palace aides, wary of overwhelming the new duchess, summarized it rather than showed it in full. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. A document she dismissed became the foundation of her downfall. And here's the final twist. The clause wasn't limited to Meghan. It extended to future holders of the Sussex title, granting the sovereign ongoing discretion to revoke and reassign it as needed. It wasn't a punishment. It was a mechanism for continuity, for ensuring the crown could never again lose control of its symbols. In the Queen's own quiet way, she had future-proofed the monarchy. But perhaps the most emotional revelation of all came from someone inside the royal archive itself, a staffer who helped retrieve the crimson folder. In a rare anonymous quote, he said, "When His Majesty read that note in the Queen's handwriting, he didn't look angry. He looked relieved. It was as if she had given him permission to finally close a wound." And that's exactly what he did. The decree was signed, the seal was pressed, and history was rewritten. Meghan Markle's claim to the Duchess of Sussex title was formally rescinded in practice, if not in every legal record, and reassigned to Zara Tindall, the Queen's granddaughter, in an act that balanced justice with poetic closure. But this chapter doesn't end there, because buried alongside that clause, on the final page of the document, was a single sentence written in the Queen's own hand, a line no one outside the family was ever meant to see. It said, "The Duchess will know her calling not by blood, but by silence." To some, it's just a cryptic flourish, another one of Elizabeth's enigmatic notes. To others, it's the Queen's final message about what true nobility means. Because if you think about it, Zara's life, her humility, her refusal to seek attention, her quiet sense of duty, is the embodiment of that silence. She didn't chase the title. She inherited it through restraint. And maybe that's what this entire story was always leading to, the quiet replacing the loud, the steady replacing the storm. Still, the Queen's document has one final mystery. Several royal insiders claim there's a missing page, a section that was removed sometime after the Queen's death. Its contents? Unknown. But rumors suggest it references another royal, a man whose name was struck through in pen. And that name might explain everything about what's coming next. Because if the whispers are true, that missing page doesn't just shed light on Meghan's fall. It exposes a secret about Prince Harry himself. A secret that could shake the monarchy all over again. The morning was quiet. Too quiet for something so monumental. There were no cheering crowds, no trumpets, no balcony waves. Just the soft chime of chapel bells echoing across the Windsor estate, mingling with a light drizzle that seemed to bless the lawns. Inside St. George's Chapel, the mood was reflective, almost reverent. Because this was no coronation of spectacle, it was one of conscience. And at its center stood Zara and Elizabeth Tindall, the Queen's granddaughter, about to become the Duchess of Sussex. Except there was one problem. She didn't want it. Those closest to Zara had always said the same thing. She never chased titles. She never envied her cousin's royal ranks. In fact, she took pride in being one of the few Windsors who could live freely, raise her children privately, and earn her own living without the constant scrutiny that came with royal privilege. She loved her horses, her family, and her independence. And now, the very crown she'd managed to escape was coming for her. This time not as a gilded cage, but as a duty. The story of Zara's reluctant coronation begins not with the ceremony itself, but with a conversation that nearly stopped it from happening. It was 2 weeks before the official signing. King Charles had invited Zara and her husband, Mike, to dinner at Highgrove. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, a simple family meal. But everyone in that house knew what it was really about. The king was going to ask her to accept the title of Duchess of Sussex. Zara had already heard whispers. Princess and had shown her the Queen's letter. She knew her grandmother's wish, but she still hadn't decided. And when Charles brought it up, she didn't hesitate to speak her mind. "Uncle," she said, her tone calm but firm. "I love Gran. I'll always honor her. But I don't need this. The country doesn't need this." Charles listened quietly, stirring his tea, the silver spoon clinking against the cup. "It's not about need, darling. It's about legacy." Zara shook her head. "It's about publicity. You know what this will look like. You know how people will take it." The king smiled gently, the kind of tired smile that comes from years of trying to balance love and duty. "People will say what they always do. What matters is what we know, and what your grandmother wanted." That was the breaking point. The moment Zara realized this wasn't about her at all. It was about finishing something that had started long before she was even born. The Queen's promise. The restoration of a title. The quiet redemption of the Sussex name. So she said yes, but not because she wanted the crown. Because she wanted peace. In the weeks that followed, preparations began, though not the kind one might expect. There were no rehearsals, no lavish fittings, no parades. Zara insisted the event be as minimal as possible. She refused designer gowns and royal jewels. She wore a soft cream coat, her grandmother's brooch pinned just above her heart. Mike, ever the grounding force, stood beside her in a simple dark suit. He joked with the ushers, trying to lighten the mood, but even he knew the gravity of what was about to happen. Inside the chapel, the air was thick with emotion. The royal family sat in near silence. King Charles looked solemn, Camilla composed but distant. Princess and stoic, proud, but visibly emotional, sat just behind her daughter, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across the aisle, Prince William kept his gaze forward, jaw tight, while a few seats in the back remained noticeably empty. One of them belonged to Prince Harry. He hadn't come. Sources later revealed that he'd received the invitation but declined, citing scheduling conflicts. But those close to him say it was more than that. Watching his cousin take on the title that once belonged to his wife was too much to bear. He said it felt like losing her all over again, a friend reportedly confided. And Meghan? Her silence was deafening. No statements, no comments, just a vague social media post from her foundation the night before, an image of a dove with the caption, "We rise above noise." But the world wasn't rising above anything. The world was watching. Outside, cameras lined the streets, journalists whispered into microphones, and royal commentators spoke in hushed awe. "This is unprecedented," one remarked. A royal title once marred by scandal is being reborn under the most unlikely successor. At precisely 11 a.m., the ceremony began. The choir hummed softly, the same hymn that had been sung at Zara's christening decades earlier. The archbishop stepped forward with the royal parchment in hand, the official decree signed by King Charles. As he began to read, Zara's eyes lowered. "By the grace of Almighty God, and with the will of His Majesty the King," the archbishop intoned, "we hereby grant the title of Duchess of Sussex to Zara and Elizabeth Tindall, in recognition of her service, honor, and unbroken commitment to the Commonwealth." There it was, the Queen's final wish fulfilled. The Sussex name, reborn through the hands of the granddaughter she trusted most. But inside Zara's heart, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like surrender. As the archbishop placed the insignia in her hands, Zara hesitated. For a brief second, she looked back toward her mother, her expression uncertain, almost pleading, as if asking, "Am I really doing the right thing?" Princess, and nodded once, her eyes glistening. That was all Zara needed. She accepted the title. The moment the decree was sealed, a low murmur spread through the chapel. King Charles rose to his feet, walking toward his niece. When he reached her, he took both her hands in his and said softly, "Your grandmother would be proud. And so am I." She smiled faintly. "Then let's hope I can live up to her." The chapel broke into applause, not the raucous kind, but gentle, respectful, almost mournful. Because everyone knew this was more than a coronation. It was a correction, a reconciliation between the monarchy's past and its wounded present. Yet, as Zara stepped out of the chapel into the cool autumn air, flashes erupted. The silence shattered. Reporters shouted her name, their questions sharp and relentless. "Duchess Zara, how do you feel about taking Meghan Markle's title? Do you think this is revenge from King Charles? Will you respond to the Sussex's statement?" Zara paused for a moment, then smiled, calm, unbothered, unshaken. "There's no revenge in honor," she said. "There's just responsibility. I hope I carry it well." It was the line that melted hearts across Britain. The humility, the grace, the quiet defiance of a woman who hadn't sought a crown but accepted it anyway. And while that quote made headlines worldwide, few knew what was really happening behind the scenes. Because while the ceremony had ended, the politics had just begun. Back at Buckingham Palace, the mood was uneasy. Courtiers were already fielding calls from journalists, diplomats, and even Commonwealth representatives demanding clarification. Some countries saw Zara's new title as a snub to Meghan. Others saw it as a restoration of royal values. "It's a delicate dance," one aide admitted. "We've reclaimed a symbol, but we've reopened old wounds." Meanwhile, inside Windsor's archives, another discovery was made. A small, sealed envelope tucked inside the Queen's original Sussex file. It was addressed to the future Duchess. The letter was handwritten, dated 2019, and signed Elizabeth R. Its contents, leaked only in part, read, "The title is not a prize, but a promise. Guard it not for glory, but for grace. The heart that serves silently serves forever." Zara reportedly read that letter